Rates of depression and anxiety have been surging across the U.S. in recent years. More than half of gun-related deaths in this country are suicides. The Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, signed into law in June, includes new gun safety measures and funding for a range of mental health services. Here are 5 facts on mental health and gun violence. Number 1. Each day, 111 Americans die of gun-related injuries. Of those deaths, 65 are suicides. 20 years ago, there were 15,045 gun-related suicides in the U.S. In 2020, there were 24,292. Suicide attempts with a firearm result in death nearly 85% of the time. For other common methods, the success rate is less than 3%. Number 2. The National Alliance on Mental Illness reports that nearly 20% of high school students have had serious thoughts of suicide, and 9% have made an attempt. Suicide rates are rising among teenagers, and COVID made things worse. Suicide rates among teens increased by as much as 50% during the pandemic, on top of the 57% increase in the decade before. Among adults, the depression rate hit 32.8% in 2021. Up from just 8.5% before the pandemic began. Number 3. In 2018, just 43% of Americans with some form of mental illness received mental health services. RAND data show that among those with serious mental illness, defined as a diagnosable mental, behavioral, or emotional disorder other than a developmental or substance use disorder that substantially interfered with or limited one or more major life activities, just 64% received mental health services. About 14 million Americans have been diagnosed with a serious mental illness. Number 4. Penn Medicine Children's Hospital of Philadelphia research shows that a proximity to violence and multiple exposures increased the risk of pediatric mental health distress. Nearly 1 in 3 mental health-related juvenile emergency room visits during the weeks after a neighborhood shooting were linked to the event. Those living with mental illness are more likely to be the victims of domestic violence, 23 times more likely, according to Angela Kimball of the National Alliance of Mental Illness. Number 5. The Bipartisan Safer Communities Act includes nearly $2 billion in mental health funding. The new funding includes $500 million through the School-Based Mental Health Services Grant Program for school-based mental health service providers, $250 million for the Comprehensive Community Mental Health Services, $150 million for the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline, $120 million to prepare and train community members and first responders on how to respond to individuals with mental disorders. And that's what you need to know about mental health and gun violence.